Hello, and welcome to our presentation of GreenSim, which is our project for SYN 100. GreenSim is meant to be a sort of simulator of a country, a fictional country, and being able to rule by making decisions and leading to different endings based on the different decisions that you've made. It also has unique features such as being able to go essentially back into the past and reversing or altering your decisions in order to get the best possible outcome. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So before we start a new game, actually, we can look at the decision tree. So these, as you can see, and as you'll soon find out, there are 10 events where the ruler needs to make decisions, and so the interface is made so that the user can scroll back up to a particular event and essentially go back to that event page where they can change the decisions they've made in order to change the outcome of that event. Additionally, there are endings. There are specific endings that occur based on reaching a certain threshold within the game score, which you'll also soon see once we start the game. But there are 6 total endings, ranging from ultra good to ultra bad endings and everything in between. There's also a settings page. It's essentially just allowing for changing the volume for the background music. As you can see, I can increase the volume, but I'm going to go ahead and decrease it in order so I don't have to speak over it. But you can also adjust the sound effects volume and adjust those as you see fit. I'll go ahead and show the credits at the end, so we can go ahead and start the game. So, hello, welcome to GreenSim. You are the ruler of country X, and your goal is to make it sustainable and eco-friendly while maintaining economic and societal functions. Please choose a name for your country. So I can go ahead and name it some sort of fictional country, Narnia. So we continue, and we'll go ahead and not skip the tutorial so we can showcase it. So there are 3 main scores to keep track of throughout the game. There's the economic score, which reflects how economically developed your country is, and so your goal to try to best predict how each decision will affect Narnia's economy in the long run. Next is the environmental score. So making sustainable decisions will increase that score, and this should be your main focus as the ruler. But making sure you don't neglect the other 2 scores is also crucial to be a successful leader. And lastly, there's the societal score. So keeping your citizens at the forefront of your mind when making decisions is essential, and your reputation as a ruler and your citizens' overall health and happiness will influence the score. And you'll notice that each of the 3 scores have a different starting point. This represents more of a country that is in a little bit of an environmental crisis, but it's still at a point where it's fixable, similar to the current state of events in the real world. So now that we know how the score bar works, let's start the game. So first off, this is the events page where you must make critical decisions as a ruler. You will make 10 decisions in total, and your overall score at the end of the game will determine the fate of Narnia. So let's see what the first decision is. So we have clean energy versus vehicle trade-in. And so you just became the ruler of Narnia and decided to start your term with a project to combat climate change. You have the 2 choices, clean energy subsidies versus vehicle trade-in policy. Clean energy subsidies aim to reduce power sector emissions by encouraging the development and use of renewable energy. On the other hand, a vehicle trade-in policy focuses on reducing vehicle emissions by paying the people to trade in their rundown vehicles. So our little robot friend here is telling us to make the decision because each one will affect the scores differently. So we can try the second one to start off. And so the text at the top changes in reaction to the decision we make. And so the score bar changed at the top, so you can see went up by 8, or the economic score went up by 8. The environmental score also went up by 8, and the societal score went up by 5. And And so we can go ahead and continue. And now this is part of the tutorial regarding the decision tree, and it shows how your decisions have affected your scores. So if we continue, you'll notice that we have the ability to basically time travel and alter our past decisions. So if we click the decision box for the first one, would you like to time travel back to event 1? We can say yes. And so if we change our decision to the first one, you notice now that the economic score actually goes down by 8. The environmental score goes up by 8, which is the same as last time, but the societal score goes up by 8 instead of 5. So there are many different decisions that have sort of minor differences in how they affect the scores, but those add up very quickly, especially knowing that there's 10 decisions. And so being able to balance out the scores as best as possible is crucial in order to be successful in the game. So now let's start the game for real. So it's essentially, the first one from the tutorial is essentially the same event. So we can go ahead and click either clean energy subsidy or vehicle trading policy. So I can go ahead and click vehicle trading policy for this one. And you'll notice that once you make the decision, you can't actually go back, but the text box changes to note that your decision did something beyond just what the score is showing up here. So it's saying, keep in mind that some emissions abatement approaches are more costly than others. And overall, the vehicle trading policy was rather expensive, though it yielded satisfactory results in terms of emissions reduction. You are still determining if the money spent on the project is worth the environmental benefits. If we continue, you'll notice the scores changed accordingly. So economic went down to 45, environment went to 43, and then society went up to 50. So next, for slippery oil, despite decades of research proving otherwise, SEA, one of the world's leading overseas oil refining companies, continues to refer to climate change as a hoax. But nevertheless, Narnia heavily relies on its business to power a sizable portion of the electric grid. So you are faced with this dilemma. Any wrong decisions might lead to negative consequences, but a solution is urgently needed. What is the plan that you decide to adopt? So we can either embargo the SEA's imports of fossil fuels, criticize the company for spreading disinformation, or develop alternative and renewable fuel sources. I think the third decision sounds good, so we can go ahead and click that. And it's good because we actually don't have any negative outcomes here. Economic and societal have stayed the same, but we do have a +8 benefit or +8 change in the environmental score. And so we can go ahead and continue. For carbon tax policy, one of your aides proposes to enforce a tax policy on fossil fuel companies. They believe that implementing carbon taxes would significantly reduce carbon emissions while the environmental benefits exceed its costs. Please consider my suggestion, said your aide enthusiastically. A major advantage for using a carbon tax to reduce emissions is its ability to induce the market to adopt other alternatives to reducing emissions, such as solar energy. So what can we do here? We can either enforce a carbon tax starting at $25 per ton and increasing at 1% annually above the rate of inflation, or enforce a carbon tax starting at $50 per ton, increasing at 1% annually above the rate of inflation. Essentially, choosing the threshold in which our carbon tax begins. So we can go ahead and pick this first one in order to make the threshold lower for where the carbon tax begins. And it looks like that was a good decision because not only did our economic score go back up to 50, but our environmental score is going up even further. And over the 2020 to 2030 period, a carbon tax starting at $25 per ton in 2020 and increasing at 1% annually above the rate of inflation achieves a reduction of 18% in carbon emissions. It's important to note that we tried our best to make these events as realistic as possible, even though it's meant to be like sort of a fictional simulator. A lot of our research was based on real life events and just being able to relate it to sort of the real world consequences of making these decisions. Moving ahead. So our next one is native resolution. So as the ruler of Narnia, you have to choose from the three options to spend a day of your life. One of them is to go to the local tribes council meeting to discuss issues regarding receding water levels for the lakes. Climate change has disrupted the traditional lifestyles of the indigenous tribes. Another is to meet with the economic advisors to discuss the bank's 30% drop in revenue. You could also go spend time with your family. So what do you do? I mean, spending time with my family doesn't sound like a bad idea, so like that. Oh, okay. So this is actually a bit of a negative outcome because it seems like our economic score has gone down by 5%. Environmental has also gone down, but our societal score has actually increased. So we can go ahead and actually reverse that decision if we continue and then go to the decision timeline. So I go back to native resolution, and yes, I would like to go back to event 4. And so instead, maybe the best idea is to go to the tribes meeting and devise a plan to resolve the impact of the climate crisis. Perfect. Okay. So I went to the tribe meeting, and a plan regarding the environmental protection of the region is getting into shape. And the tribes thank you dearly for your support. So that was a much better outcome, even if the societal score hadn't increased. The environmental score did, and there was less of a negative outcome compared to the third option. So we can go ahead and continue with that. Next up, we have fossil fuel financing. So the banks have been giving loans to fossil fuel companies to support their operations. These loans give fossil fuel companies the financial resources needed to exploit non-renewable resources, making the fossil fuel industry one of the most profitable of Narnia. Will you interfere with the bank's investments? So we can either negotiate with banks to shift investments to renewable energy or support banks for profit. Knowing that this is the more economically friendly option, but less so environmentally friendly, we can go ahead and choose this and see how it affects things. So we've noticed that the economic increase was beneficial in that it went up by 8%. But that being said, not only did our environmental score decrease by 8%, but our societal score actually also went down by 5%. So that's actually more of a downside or a negative outcome just because of the changes that were made through that decision. So if we continue, we can go ahead and go back and travel back to event 5, and so I'll go ahead and pick this option instead. Okay, that definitely looks a lot better, all positives across the board, so I'll go ahead and work with that. Next we have protester panic. So at 8 a.m. this morning, your aide informed you about a protest in response to the government permitting the use of low-efficiency vehicles to let one of the ministers ride around in his limousine. The police on scene say there are approximately 100 protesters. Many people are frustrated because they can't get to work due to the protest shutting down the I-75 freeway. What should we do about it? We can either call the police force off and leave the protesters be, arrest the protesters that protect their identities from the press, or negotiate with the protesters for them to leave in exchange for issuing a new policy regarding gas vehicles. So let's see. Could potentially, I know that just leaving the protesters be would definitely cause more frustration just because of people are already frustrated about not being able to get to work. And arresting the protesters would just look bad. So I think I'm going to go ahead and negotiate with the protesters and at the same time issue a new policy regarding gas vehicles. Okay? And so that changed many things, so in a positive way. So we can go ahead and continue with that. Now for reforestation organization. So a forest fire has occurred in the southern region of Narnia. Citizens who live in the area were heavily affected and are demanding that you begin reforestation of the site. However, the rest of the country was not impacted directly, so they are hesitant to spend their tax money on reforestation efforts. Will you support reforestation efforts? So what we can do is either support reforestation with government funding, use the news and social media to raise awareness of the forest fire and request donations, or don't support reforestation efforts at all. I'm assuming this will negatively impact the economic score, so we can go ahead and use the news and social media instead to create a donations from the public themselves. And yeah, so it didn't negatively impact our economic score, thankfully, but it did cause our societal and environmental score to go up. Countries Y and Z request your help establishing an international nonprofit organization dedicated to solving the environmental crisis by influencing public opinion. Will you accept their request? We can go ahead and accept the request. But that being said, the policies enacted are too general and fail to effectively target a specific group of people. The organization's efforts are unsuccessful in convincing the public to take action towards the environmental crisis. So we can go ahead and continue and reverse that decision. I can actually scroll backwards since the decision tree sort of loops around in order to make it easier for the user to sort of scroll to the desired decision that they want to go back to. But that being said, we can go back to event 8 and instead I think, well, let's see what happens if we decline the request. Okay, so your understanding of Narnia's economic and societal position allows you to enact policies designed specifically for your citizens. These policies effectively convince people to adopt more sustainable lifestyle choices and lead to a mass social change towards sustainability. So all the better for us. So a reputable research institute discovers a new non-carbon-based energy source in the uncharted deep sea. The viability of the energy source is unknown and requires further investigation. However, the research institute is currently facing financial difficulties. So will we support them? We can go ahead and fund the institute a little. And so that's good because it positively affects our economic and environmental score, which is good. Although we can check to see how funding it greatly would affect things. The benefit of the decision tree is that you can learn how each specific decision affects things in the same game, rather than having to go back repeatedly in a new game every time. And so thanks to the generous funding, there is more positive change, as you can see by the score, which has gone up by 8 in comparison to last time, which only went up by 5, 4, and even the societal score went up this time by 5%. And so the last decision, your National Space Agency requests funding to design and implement new, effective methods to clean space junk. Will you support them? So we provide a lot of funding to support the development of a new method. Let's provide a lot of funding. Okay, so with your generous support, we actually went up a little, but if we go, okay. So the current circumstances are acceptable for Narnia. We managed to keep the existing social, environmental, and economical issues under control, but the future will of Narnia is unpredictable. So if we continue, you'll see that the ending appears once you unlock it, which is good. But if we go ahead and start a second game, if we do Narnia again, yes, we'll skip it this time, so let's start the game. So let's go ahead and do an example where we get a lower score than we did last time. So if we do clean energy subsidy, that's actually a higher score. But if we go back to the decision tree, we can go ahead and click vehicle trading policy, so that decreases things. And so For slippery oil, I believe immediately embargo will be a bit of a negative outcome. We can go ahead and do nothing. Not only doesn't increase anything, but decreases the environmental score. For native resolution, I think spending time with family was the lower option. We can go ahead and do nothing. And then protest or panic, we can go ahead and call the police force off, which decreases the societal score. If we don't support reforestation efforts. If we do nothing, or nothing and life continues. I actually know that from last game that the global organization accepting the request did worse than actually doing nothing. We do nothing here, did nothing and life continues. And if we cut funding, all goes down by 10. So if we continue, bad news. Narnia is obliterated by a nuclear bomb unleashed by one of your subordinates. So your poor leadership has led to economic, societal, and environmental collapse to the point that your subordinate felt that a bomb would be better than continuing on. So as you can see, we unlocked another ending in the bottom right. And actually, when you click on the ending, you'll be able to go back and see what circumstances led to that ending. If you've unlocked it, that is. If you haven't yet, then you will not be able to see it until you do. For the sake of clarity, to reveal the remaining 4 endings, this is the ultra good ending. So this is when all 3 scores are at 70% or higher throughout the game, or once you finish the game. And then these 3 endings are corresponding to each of the bad endings for each societal score. So essentially, if you get 30% or lower in a certain societal score, whether it be economic, environmental, or societal, then you get one of these endings. With that being said, that's all there is to the endings. So the last thing we have to show is the credits as well as the citations for our images as well as the sources we used to write our events.
Okay, so those were all the credits as well as the citations for our game. It's also important to note that the citations will be listed again in the description below due to some of the formatting issues that Unity has with text that prevent us from properly doing MLA citations. With that being said, that is all for our presentation. So thank you for taking a look at GreenSim.